I walked into divorce court, fully prepared to lose. Everything after my cheating wife demanded the house, the business, and even primary custody of our kids. The courtroom felt colder than the December air outside. My wife's attorney sat confidently beside her, stacks of documents neatly arranged like trophies waiting to be claimed. She didn't even look nervous. In fact, she smiled when she saw me take my seat. The woman I'd spent 16 years building a life with had spent the last 6 months tearing it apart. She'd cheated, she'd lied, and somehow she was still the one acting like the victim. I deserve what's mine, she told anyone willing to listen. What she meant was everything. The house we built from an empty lot, the company I started from a folding table in our garage, the savings account meant for our children's future. As the judge reviewed the filings, my chest tightened. Every calculation pointed toward disaster. Then my father leaned toward me from the gallery. His voice was barely above a whisper. Give her everything. I turned, convinced I'd heard him wrong, but the calm look in his eyes stopped me cold. Because hidden beneath, the wreckage of my marriage was a secret, so carefully buried that even my wife didn't know it existed. And if my father was right, giving her everything wasn't surrender. It was the beginning. My name is Daniel Carter, and for most of my life, people mistook my silence for weakness. I was 43 years old when my marriage collapsed, the owner of a regional logistics company that employed nearly 80 people, and the father of 2 children who meant more to me than anything I owned. From the outside, my life looked stable, successful even, but I had always been the quiet one. My wife, Melissa, filled every room she entered. She was charming, outgoing, and naturally good at convincing people she was right. I handled problems behind the scenes while she took center stage. At parties, she told stories about our success. At work, I stayed late making sure the success actually happened. Over time, that became the pattern of our entire marriage. The harder I worked, the less visible I became. When the business grew, people praised her networking skills. When we bought our dream home, friends complimented her decorating choices. Few noticed the years of 18-hour days, sleepless nights, and financial risks that made those things possible. I never demanded recognition, but I noticed who quietly expected my sacrifices. Melissa did. So did her family. They treated my reliability like a permanent resource that could never run out. The irony was that the people who underestimated me most were the same people who believed they knew everything about me. They knew my routines. They knew my habits. What they didn't know was the one secret my father and I had protected for nearly 2 decades, and that secret was about to change everything. The affair didn't begin with a confession. It began with small things that were easy to dismiss. Melissa stopped asking how my day had gone. When I spoke at dinner, her attention drifted toward her phone. If I suggested a family trip or weekend plan, she answered with distracted nods that felt more polite than genuine. At first, I blamed stress. Then I started noticing the details, the way she smiled at messages she never shared, the way she angled her screen away when I walked into a room, the way conversations suddenly stopped when I entered family gatherings. Nothing dramatic, just enough to leave a quiet ache in my chest. Her parents changed too. Her father began speaking to me as if I worked for the family instead of being part of it. Her mother made comments disguised as compliments. Melissa always had expensive taste, she'd say with a soft laugh while looking around our house. The implication was clear. Melissa had elevated me, not the other way around. One evening during a family dinner, her brother raised a glass and joked that if Melissa ever left me, she'd probably take half the state with her. Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. Melissa didn't defend me. She simply smiled into her wine glass and let the joke hang in the air. That smile stayed with me all night, not because it was cruel, because it looked like someone quietly enjoying a future nobody else had told me about yet. And deep down, I was beginning to suspect she already had one planned. The moment everything became real happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I wasn't looking for evidence. I was looking for a document Melissa had asked me to print from our shared cloud account. Instead, I found a folder she had forgotten to hide. Inside were screenshots, messages, and photos that answered every question I'd been avoiding. There was another man. More than that, there had been another life running parallel to our marriage for nearly a year. I sat alone in my office staring at the screen while rain tapped against the windows. Oddly, I didn't feel anger at first. I felt clarity. Every strange smile, every late-night text, every dismissive comment from her family suddenly fit together like pieces of a puzzle. The most painful discovery wasn't the affair itself. It was reading messages where Melissa and her boyfriend discussed what she expected to receive after the divorce. The house, the business, the savings, even future company profits. They spoke about those things as if they already belonged to her, as if I was simply an obstacle waiting to be removed. That night, I drove to my father's house. I showed him everything. He read the messages quietly, then placed the phone on the table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me and asked a simple question. Are you trying to win an argument, or are you trying to win your future? That was the moment I stopped thinking like a betrayed husband and started thinking several moves ahead. The next few months were the quietest of my life. While Melissa prepared for a fight, I prepared for an ending. Years earlier, when I started the company, my father, a former accountant with 4 decades of experience, had insisted on a structure that seemed overly cautious at the time. Most of the operating assets, equipment, and intellectual property were held separately from the business everyone saw on paper. I hadn't thought much about it for years. Melissa certainly hadn't. Her attention had always been focused on visible success, revenue reports, company growth, the house, the lifestyle, not the foundations underneath. Following my attorney's advice, I documented everything. Every financial record, every communication, every asset, every obligation. I answered requests promptly, remained professional, and never reacted emotionally. That confused people. Melissa expected resistance. Her family expected outrage. Instead, I became agreeable. When negotiations began, I didn't argue over furniture, vehicles, or property. I didn't fight over appearances. I simply listened. The more confident they became, the more information they revealed about their plans. My father often reminded me that impatience exposes more secrets than interrogation. He was right. By the time the divorce hearing arrived, everyone believed they understood the entire situation. My attorney knew better. My father knew better. And for the first time in months, so did I. The most powerful advantage wasn't a hidden asset. It was allowing people to underestimate the person sitting quietly across the table. The day of the final hearing arrived with almost no drama. Melissa sat beside her attorney looking confident. Her parents occupied the front row, exchanging satisfied glances whenever the discussion turned toward the division of assets. When my turn came, I did exactly what my father had told me months earlier. I agreed. The house? She could have it. The luxury vehicles? No objection. Most of the visible marital assets? Fine. I watched confusion flicker across her attorney's face. They had prepared for a battle and found none. The settlement was finalized. Melissa walked out of court believing she had won everything that mattered. For several weeks, nothing happened. Then reality arrived. The house carried enormous maintenance costs she had never managed herself. Property taxes came due. Loans attached to several assets became her responsibility. The lifestyle she had fought to keep required a steady stream of income she no longer had. Meanwhile, the company continued operating exactly as planned. The assets that generated its long-term value had never been tied to the pieces she demanded. That was the secret my father had protected years earlier. The visible empire wasn't the engine. It was only the storefront. Months later, I heard that Melissa's family had gathered around a dining table trying to understand why their expected fortune wasn't materializing. The same people who once laughed at me were now studying documents. They should have read before celebrating. And for the first time, the silence belonged to them. The call started about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. At first I ignored them. Then came the messages. Not from Melissa, from her family. The same relatives who had once treated the divorce like a victory parade were suddenly reaching out with careful, measured words. Their confidence had disappeared, replaced by a kind of nervous politeness I had never heard from them before. The truth had finally reached everyone. Melissa hadn't inherited a kingdom. She had inherited expenses. The house that impressed neighbors required constant upkeep. The assets she fought for produced far less value than people assumed. Maintaining the image she wanted became harder with every passing month. Meanwhile, the company continued growing. Employees stayed. Clients stayed. My reputation stayed intact. People who worked with me had always known, something Melissa's family never understood. Success wasn't created by appearances. It was created by decisions made when nobody was watching. What surprised me most was how little satisfaction I felt from their struggles. The real reward wasn't watching them realize their mistake. It was realizing my worth had never depended on their opinion. For years, I had allowed other people to define my value through what I provided for them. Losing that burden changed everything. And maybe that's why stories like this matter, because sooner or later, everyone faces a moment when they discover whether their value comes from what they own or from who they are when everything else is stripped away. A year after the divorce, I drove past the old house on my way home from work. For a moment, I considered stopping. Then I kept driving. That surprised me. There was a time when I thought winning meant reclaiming everything I had lost. The house, the marriage, the life I had spent years building. But distance has a way of revealing what actually matters. The house was never my home. The business was never my identity. And the marriage had ended long before the paperwork said it did. What remained was something far more valuable: peace. My relationship with my children grew stronger because I stopped wasting energy fighting battles that no longer mattered. The company continued expanding. My father and I spent more time together than we had in years, often laughing about how close I came to making decisions, based on anger instead of patience. As for Melissa, I genuinely stopped keeping track. Not because I forgave everything, because I no longer needed the story to continue. The revenge had never been taking something from her. It was refusing to destroy myself trying to beat her. Looking back, I finally understand what my father meant when he whispered those 4 words in the courtroom: give her everything. Because sometimes the smartest move isn't protecting what people can see. It's protecting what they never knew was valuable in the first place. And sometimes the quietest victory is simply walking away with your future still intact.